Grace Communion International presents You're Included, the good news of Jesus Christ. Our host is Dr. J. Michael Feazell.
Thanks for joining us on another edition of You're Included, the unique interview series devoted to practical implications of Trinitarian theology in today's complex world. Our guest today is Dr. Andrew Root, Assistant Professor of Youth and Family Ministry at Luther Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota. He's the author of Revisiting Relational Youth Ministry from a Strategy of Influence to a Theology of Incarnation, and Relationships Unfiltered. A former Young Life staff worker, he has served in churches and social service agencies as a youth outreach associate and a gang prevention counselor. He lives in St. Paul with his wife Cara and their two children, Owen and Maisie. Thanks for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
We have a lot to talk about. Youth ministry is a dynamic area, and you've got some challenging things to say that are significant for facing what the church is up against in today's world. I wanted to read from Revisiting Relational Youth Ministry, your first book. Ministry, then, is not about using relationships to get individuals to accept a third thing, whether that be conservative politics, moral behaviors, or even the gospel message. Rather, ministry is about connection, one to another, about sharing in suffering and joy, about persons meeting persons with no pretense or secret motives. What are you driving at here?
Yeah, I mean, the whole book, as you mentioned, really revolves around that point. And that point was really born in my own experience, and it was actually right around this area in a church here in Southern California. And these kids who kind of lacked the middle-class decorum that the kids had when I worked in suburban Minnesota, suburban St. Paul, they lacked that, so they could simply just say, "Get away from me." But they knew that I had an agenda for the relationship. And maybe it was a good agenda, maybe it was actually good for them, but my ministry wasn't essentially about them. It was about where I could take them. And maybe some of the things were really good. Keeping them in church, helping them to understand who Jesus Christ is, those are all great things. But they had the sense that it was happening outside of our actual real relationship. So you mentioned the third thing. That's something that I've taken from Dietrich Bonhoeffer in his first book, Sanctorum Communo. He has this beautiful phrase where he says, when we encounter the neighbor, God is there. And he says, there's not a third thing. There's no third thing. There's just me and you, or I and thou. And Jesus Christ becomes present there, not outside of that. And I think so often in youth ministry, the objective has been to use our relationship with young people to get to some third thing. And so what I try to do in the book is just reimagine what it would be to think about ministry, and it's really all ministry, not just youth ministry, but to think about ministry in this idea that there's no third thing, that somewhere in the midst of really encountering another person, God becomes concretely present.